Ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be tackling the economic file, also some of the political news. The first of the economic files on Sunday, the Minister of International Cooperation, Sahar Nasser, and Minister of Housing, Mustafa Madbouli, had signed a cooperation protocol worth $2.5 million. We're going to be talking about the prospects of this agreement that will both encourage the foreign investment and the housing industry here in Egypt. We're also going to be talking about the latest Syrian developments in the political scene. A lot of battlegrounds have been taking place. A lot of conflict has been taking place. But first off, before we start discussing this with our distinguished guests, let's check out some of the top stories making the news. The first of which, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi receiving on Tuesday Cypriot Foreign Minister Ioannis Kasoulides, with the presence of Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry at the Cypriot ambassador to Cairo. President Sisi stressed that the Egyptian-Cypriot ties, which have witnessed a noticeable positive development, which contributed to boosting joint cooperation between both nations. The President also praised the trilateral ties between Egypt, Greece and Cyprus, adding that cooperation between the three nations have been successful in all fields. The second story is the government saying on Monday that electricity prices will increase by 40% for household as part of its plan to repair its finances by eliminating power subsidies entirely over the next few years. The Ministry of Electricity said in a statement the latest price hikes ranges from 25% to 40% depending on consumption levels and will be applied retroactively from last month. And joining us now over the phone is Dr. Amr Mohsen, the Professor of Energy at Alexandria University. Dr. Mohsen, hello and good evening.
Good evening.
Dr. Mohsen, now the latest news about actually the electricity prices and the bills will be increasing from 25 to 40%. How do you receive such news? Is it justified? How do you think the Egyptian citizen will react to this?
Well, okay, the figure you just quoted, which is an increase of 25 to 40%, is actually a little bit misleading, because if we look at the cheapest segment of electricity, which is a consumption up to 50 kilowatt hours, which is the unit of electricity consumption, so up to 50 kilowatt hours per month, that would mean, that latest increase would mean that instead of paying around £5 per month, the payment will be under £7. So you could call it an increase of some 25 or 30%, but in actual fact, it's only a couple of pounds. So the impact of the new increase in the charge for electricity would actually be softer than it appears.
But you were talking about small figures. No bill comes that low, but in the big scheme of things, higher bills will have even higher increases. Do you think it's still fair?
Well, indeed, the higher your consumption, or the higher of a resident's consumption per month, the higher the increment will become. So I think this is logical and socially fair, and also sort of acceptable. Because if you look at the big picture, you find that currently, even though the charge for electricity has increased last year because they started the 5-year removal of subsidy program already, but when you look at the current charge, it is still subsidized. So, for example, the financial year that just ended, which is 2015-16, the subsidy for the electricity has amounted to 60 billion Egyptian pounds. So, in that program of subsidy removal, which goes gradually, we find that in the new budget, 2016-17, that 60 billion pound subsidy will go down to around 30 billion. So there's still subsidy going on. And you find that the increment, like I just said a minute ago, is actually gradual. So you have the large consumers having to pay a bigger increment than the lower consumers, which is socially adequate, I would say.
Dr. Mohsen, the government has signed recently a deal with the German company Siemens, based here in Cairo as well, of generating electricity, having a lot of power plants, and also the electricity will actually increase by 50% in the space of 2 years. So people expected that maybe the prices, the electricity bills, would actually go down, or until then, until it's operating in full capacity, it would still be the same. Is it contradictory?
Not really, because when you look at the expenses of getting or supplying electricity to, let's say, a residential consumer, you're dealing mainly with three groups of expenses. You're dealing with the expenses of generating the electricity, which is what you refer to as the most recent plant additions, not just from Germany, but also from China and from other places. So you have those three payment or expenses, if you like, expense groups. The first is in buying plants to generate electricity and buying the fuel to run those plants. This is the first part. Second part is the transmission through the national grid. And the third part is the distribution in the low voltage grid up to the consumer. So when you're talking about spending money in buying new plants, this is not the only expenditure. You're talking also about increasing the capability and improving the efficiency of the transmission grid and also the distribution grid. So in fact, you're talking about a lot of expenses. I think I heard the minister mentioning today that the expenses in the three groups, generation, transmission, and distribution, have amounted to 110 million pounds in just this last 12 months. So it's indeed a lot of expenses, and of course, these have to be recovered from somewhere, which puts more pressure onto the subsidy program in order to alleviate it along those 5 years.
Dr. Amr Mohsen, Professor of Energy at Alexandria University, thank you very much for joining us. And moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to the third story making the news, as the border forces managed on Tuesday to thwart the smuggling attempts and illegal immigration of criminal groups and drug smugglers who aim at distorting the national security on all strategic levels. In the zone of the 2nd Field Army, border forces seized a number of vehicles in which the criminals plan to smuggle drugs as well as elements used to make IEDs in Rafah. At the 3rd Field Army Zone, the forces also managed to seize 2,414 kilograms of drugs at the East Tunnel and discovered 5 drug outlets at Abordis. Meanwhile, at the Northern Military Zone, the forces arrested 140 people of different nationalities, including 13 Egyptians, 21 Sudanese, 15 Somalis, 6 Eritreans, 7 Afghans, and 78 people of other nationalities who were trying to immigrate illegally. And now let's go out and check out this report regarding the Ministry of International Cooperation signing the agreements, and we'll be right back to talk more about it with our distinguished guest.
Minister of International Cooperation Dr. Sahar Nasr signed on Sunday a protocol worth $2.5 million with the Minister of Housing Dr. Mustafa Madbouli. Dr. Nasr asserted that this protocol came within the frame of cooperation between the two ministries as well as the keenness of the state to serve the Egyptian citizen. She also noted that a committee that includes representatives of the two ministries will be held. Its main target will be the general supervision on the common activities of the two ministries. The Minister of Housing thanked Dr. Nasr for extended efforts in supporting the projects of the Ministry of Housing. Separately, Nasser stated that Egypt is negotiating a $100 million loan from the African Development Bank Group to finance the country's plan to upgrade slums nationwide. She further said her ministry would dedicate part of the $500 million World Bank loan to develop slums. Earlier, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said in June that the government would complete the development of slums and poor villages in the next 2 years. Egypt's official statistics agency CAPMAS recently said in a statement that slums make up 38.6% of inhabitant land mass across Egyptian cities. Slums are spread over 226 out of Egypt's 234 cities. Only 8 cities in the provinces of Suez, Sharqiya, Kafr al-Sheikh and Giza are clear of slum areas. Unsafe slum areas occupy 2.8% of all slums in Egypt, with unsafe slums of the second degree risk occupying 71.5%. State-run agency added 33 of the unplanned slum areas in the capital Cairo and adjacent Giza have undergone development work funded by the Slum Development Fund. According to CAPMAS, the government aims to prepare a nationwide map of unplanned areas and develop 27 of them annually in Egypt's 27 provinces during the period between 2016 and 2019.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Ali Masoud, the Dean of the Faculty of Politics and Economics at Beni Suef University. Dr. Masoud, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
You're welcome.
Dr. Masoud, first of all, the Minister of International Cooperation, Sahar Nasr, and the Minister of Housing, Mustafa Madbouli, had signed a cooperation protocol worth $2.5 million. They obviously established a committee that will overlook the finances and the procedures and the transactions taking place, and it really aims at developing the rural areas and the slums here in Egypt under the directives of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. This is not the first time we see the government really making an effort to develop the slum areas here in Egypt. How important do you see this deal, and how soon do you think we will feel the impact of such projects?
Okay, first of all, when we talk about slums, it is a very, very critical issue in Egypt. When you talk about estimated of 28% of Egyptians live in slum areas. This means they don't have good services, their economic background and poverty are really, really in a very critical situation. Let us see, we should not be very optimistic about that 2-point-something million is going to solve the problem. But what's important about this deal is the capacity building, that part of it. Is how to manage the process of developing the slum areas. We did a huge effort in that, but I tell you what, the problem with the other initiatives in Egypt was not related to finance, by the way. The government allocated millions for developing the slum areas, and it ends up not developing the slum areas because of lots of rules and regulations and building permits and the lands to whom belongs that they want to develop the slums on them. But the capacity part of it, the other thing about this agreement, which is adds a new part of it, a new aspect, which is the new approach about when you develop the slum area, you really should have the economic background for people who actually live in this area. And we really don't want to replicate what happens in the Weka. When you move these people from the Weka to the Haram area, it ends up not all people actually move there, and it was lots of a problem. Why? Because their economic linkages and economic background and their economy were far from the new area. So when you have a new agreement that emphasizes the economic part of it and the economic approach and economic background, this is going to be really value added for the process. So let me emphasize, it is not about a matter of finance. 2.5 million, it is not that big deal, but the process of it actually, and what the value added that it adds to the process and procedure, this is going to be the main part of it.
Yes. Well, also, Nasser Madbouli met with Philippe Thiraud, the chairperson of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, to looking into financing projects that will be really the Abu Rawesh wastewater project for processing it. Now, talking about such a deal, also, does this come under the infrastructure development, and does this in a way go hand in hand with developing the slums areas, or do you feel that they are two different entities, two different projects?
Well, now what is actually is new in the way that we manage Egypt now, that we are managing according to a strategic vision. So I expect that all effort is not going to be one there and one here, that they should be really connected. One main part that we really have to work very hard on it is the infrastructure part. Up until now, a huge portion of what the infrastructure project that have been implemented in Egypt or conducted, that actually the army actually helped so much in doing that. But still, the infrastructure issue, it is a very, 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 very big issue. You cannot have economic development with having infrastructure first. So I believe they are connected together for sure.
Well, Dr. Sahar Nasr, the Minister of International Cooperation, is also in the process of negotiating a $100 million loan from the African Development Bank Group related to the development of slum and rural areas. Now, talking about all these projects getting loans and getting financial assistance from these different banks and different entities, how are we going to repay all of these loans? How are we going to repay all of these debts? Are we borrowing really higher than our capacity, above our capacity to actually repay it, especially that our economic prowess right now is not as strong as we would have hoped for?
Well, in terms of the sustainability debt level, what we call it in economic, we usually say that there is a specific limit of debt that if it is increased up this level, your economy is not going to be sustainable, that you cannot pay. I did a research study a year ago, and I found out actually we're still under the sustainability level of debt. So it is not that the only problem that I'm worried about is the problem of the exchange rate, because you are going to repay back this by dollars. It happens. So this is the only thing I'm worried about. But still, I believe the data problem under control. And if you connect that with the commitment of our government not increase the budget deficit so much. And I believe this has also a relation with the increase in the electricity price. Why? Because when you talk about the subsidies, you are talking about now, if you are talking about our revenues, all of our budget actually, it is $80 billion, 80 billion Egyptian pounds, and we found actually 285 out of them goes to subsidy, which the majority of this number goes to energy sector. And then reforming the energy sector, which the government did a huge part, which is Siemens and all these extensions and all this expansion of energy facilities. But still, we are talking about you really have to reform the subsidy issues in energy. It is a really critical thing to do. And guess what? We have to do it sooner or later, but we really have to do it. It is not about getting hard on people. It is a matter of doing the right thing. It is a matter of doing the right thing. If you have a broken arm or mismatches arm, you really have to be really tough to reallocate it again. This went over in all Latin American countries, in Turkey before, and some of Asian countries, in many of Eastern European countries. So we are not that new experience. We are going to do it, and we should do it. And it is even a little bit late. I believe this can be tackled even. It should have been tackled in the 1990s, not now. So putting all this, all of these together, you got an indicator that the government is not allowing the budget deficit to get more than that. And if you connect this, but if you remember last year when the President Sisi refused to sign the government budget because it was higher than he expected. So the government actually rewrite and re-estimated the budget to be a little, just to put this under control. You cannot actually control the public debt, domestic or external debt, and you have all this headache in your budget problem, and guess what? The huge part of it goes for subsidy. And energy subsidy doesn't make any sense that if you subsidize electricity and if you use so much electricity, you get benefit more. Why we are subsidize electricity for foreign embassies here, for foreign people, like subsidize gasoline, for instance, and anyone come for to spend 1 week in Egypt and he has his own car or embassy's cars, go and benefit from subsidy. But when you talk about subsidies, yes, you should put in your hand and in front of your eyes the poor, and how can you deal with it? And the best way I suggest is dealing with that with a monetary transfer. You have to identify that and you have to work out. And well, guess what? Masr al-Khair, a civil organization in Egypt, can identify the poor, real poor, and identify very well in El Balwana, in Georgia, in Sohaj, in Upper Egypt. And they did very well, very good job in identifying. So I believe the government has the capacity to do it. It's a matter of commitment to do it.
Well, Dr. Masoud, if before lifting any subsidies or applying these austerity measures or hard measures, economic ones, it has already been quite difficult and hard for the Egyptian citizen. So if we are going to apply these measures and lift some of these subsidies, shouldn't we in return increase the average income of the Egyptian citizen? Maybe not as much as the subsidies will be lifted, because then we're not doing much, but at least have some sort of increase some sort of the support the Egyptian citizen has to have at least bear with these measures.
We should increase their productivity. They are never going to increase their income unless they increase their productivity. We are not now in the social area, in the socialism area, where actually the socialist state pays money for people who produce or not produce, who are productive or not productive. Our productivity is very low, and we really should face our Egyptian people that our productivity is extremely low. Okay, so we are not begging the government to increase the income, and I believe it is the wrong direction to ask the government to increase the income, because the government is not going to increase the income. What we really should ask the government to do and direct government to do, and even hold the government accountable if it is not doing it. How can you improve the business environment? People to work, people to produce more, so they're increasing of productivity. So this is the way to do it. Yes, the poor in Egypt are facing really huge struggle now. Yes, but we don't want to see that, it is very dark, that we cannot see any way out. Well, if you look at in 1980s, all Latin American countries were in the same situation. And guess what? In Latin America in 1980s, you are talking about inflation rate was increased more than 1,000%. The inflation rate we are talking now in Egypt between 12 and 13.
Yes.
In Latin America in the 1980s, it increased 1,000.
Yes.
In Turkey as well. So, yeah, but how can you really hold on and commit for a really good and tough?
Yes,
it
definitely
has to be a tough reform package.
Well, Dr. Masoud, earlier in tonight's episode, we were joined over the phone by Dr. Amr Mohsen, who's a professor of energy at Alexandria University, and I asked him, in light of the agreements that were signed with the German company Siemens about building power plants and generating electricity, increasing the production of electricity about 50% more now, at least in the span of 2 years. So people expected maybe prices would go lower, or maybe until then they would stay stable until they're fully operational. He said that, well, we increase it now because in part we are paying for this development and this expansion. Is this true? Should the Egyptian citizen start paying for the expansion and development projects of such plants being created, or is the government, if it is embarking on new projects and new power plants, it definitely knows that it has the capacity to finance such a project on its own without the assistance of the citizen?
Well, this is not true. Actually, the increasing the electricity, why? It has nothing to do actually with the new facilities or paying actually it has a relation to do that the whole package of economic reform, and you are paying less than. So you didn't pay the right price. So what we assume that you should pay, for instance, 100 pounds and you still pay 30. So if I increase this 30 to even 60, which is 100%, you really still did not pay the right or the correct price or the whatever the price is. So why we are paying more? When you are talk about it, if you are expecting, you can expect lower price when the production increase of electricity if you are in a free market, which means people are paying what they got. But unfortunately, people paying a price less than they got. So because they are subsidized. So still, you know, it has nothing to do. You know, it is accurate. It has nothing to do with the new installations. It has. It actually, what is going on is you are implementing a whole package, a whole economic reform package, in a very delicate way. Part of it, you really have to tackle this subsidy issue, which you really are very, very late to do it. You should have been done it in 1990s. We would be in a much better situation. But because we scared about, wow, you cannot do it. And guess what? Sadat even tried to do it. President Sadat tried to do it, and it didn't work, so hold it back. And I can expect if Sadat went on in his economic reform package in 1970s, early 1970s, we would be like South Korea now. So we really should do it. You know, the more time you spend
delaying
is going to be, the cost is going to be much, much higher.
Yes.
Look about the public debt. 5 years ago, it was now much, you can deal with it much, much easier than now.
Yes.
So you really should tackle it, and we, the government, should be really extreme transparent with the Egyptian citizens, tell them the problem, and we're really in a very bad situation, and we really should to do it, and we really should to walk off a very tough road, and we should
And
do it
should we
together.
expect the same thing happening with petroleum products and gasoline?
It should be. It really should be.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely a lot of economic developments are still coming up ahead in Egypt in light of all these decisions, especially in the electricity and energy market. And now let's turn our attention to another political file, which is the deteriorating situation, humanitarian situation in Syria. But before we do that, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Ali Masoud, the Dean of the Faculty of Politics and Economics at the Beni Suef University. Dr. Masoud, always a pleasure having you with us.
You're welcome, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's check out this report and we'll be right back.